Okay, so I'm going to just remind you a little bit about how to do the composite for the currency project. First thing I'm going to show you is how I have all my assets for the project all in one folder. So I'm all ready to go with my numbers, my leaf, my outline of the golden ratio and spiral, my duotone photo, seal, and security pattern. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to open up a Photoshop file, and I'm going to open it up using my golden ratio template because I know it is the right size that I want. So I'm going to go ahead and click on that, but I'm going to go to File, Open, and I'm going to open it with Photoshop. And it's going to ask me a bunch of questions, and what I really am looking for right here is I'm looking in this area because I want to make sure that it's the right size, and that is the size that I set up. I already knew in advance that I had set up the golden ratio in the size that I wanted my currency to be. I want it to be 300 pixels per inch, and then I do need to change this right here. I need to change that to RGB color, and then I'm going to say OK. And then that's going to open it up in Photoshop. One of the things I want to do right away is I want to change the name of this layer just to keep all my layers organized, and I'm going to change that to my golden ratio layer. I'm going to do what we do every time we open up a Photoshop file is I'm going to go up to image mode, and I'm going to check that it's RGB, that's in the right color spectrum that I want, and then I'm also going to go to image size, and I am going to check that it is 300 pixels per inch and it's the correct size that we want. Now of course we just opened it and we know we just did all that, but I just want you all to be in the habit to always be checking that your file is 300 pixels per inch and that it's the right inches size, because as we know in Photoshop there is no going back once you've started a file at the wrong dots per inch. So we have our file, Photoshop file open, and this is our size of our currency. And I've got a little bit of space around here so that my artwork can go to here and I can have that kind of clean space that you see on American currency. But what I don't have here is the bleed, meaning that I don't have the space for if any of my artwork is going to go completely off of the trim size of the piece. So I need to add a little more space all the way around it. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to go up to image, canvas size, and I'm going to add a little more space around the outside. And remember that the bleed is usually 0.125 inches. So I'm just going to bring this up a little bit larger, and I'm going to make this 7.25. I'm going to take this one to 3.5. I'm going to leave my artwork in the middle. That's what this means here. If I were to click up here, then it would add all of that new space below, and then the opposite here. But I want to add the space equally all around my currency, so I'm going to keep my artwork in the middle, and then I'm going to say OK. And then that gives me a little more space around the outside for the bleed and even for some of that clear space that some currency has. So we're going to start now placing in some of our imagery and our art pieces that we have made either already in Photoshop prior or in Illustrator. So I'm going to start by going to File, going to File, Place Linked. And now I'm specifically using linked because I want to be able to update or change any of my artwork later and have it automatically link to this composite Photoshop file. So I'm going to do place linked, and I'm going to go grab some of those assets that I've already got all ready to go, and I'm going to start with my duotone and place that in. Now remember, the reason we did him in a different Photoshop file was because he's a duotone, and that means there's only two colors in that Photoshop file, whereas we're working in an RGB file with more of a fuller color spectrum. So the duotone file was done by itself in Photoshop, and then now we're bringing it into this RGB file. And now he placed in small because we know this guy is kind of small. He's only a 1-inch file, so I'm going to make him a little bit bigger, but not too much bigger because I know that he can't handle being too much bigger, and I'm going to kind of just place him right in here. And here I do have a decision of like, where is he going to bleed to? Is he going to go off of my trim? Is he going to stay within my shape? So I kind of have a decision there to make. And because he's, I know, a little small, I don't want to push him too far. So I'm just going to make him about that size. And I do want to pay attention to the naming of my files and just that, make sure that all of these layers are named correctly so I can easily find them later. The next thing I'm going to go file, place, and I'm going to place in is one of my numbers. And here I've got a number that I've already made in Illustrator. I'm going to place that in. And I'm going to put that up here in this corner. Now, the reason I did not make this number in Photoshop is because I did all of this work. I did all this outline work on it, and I've got the drop shadow on it, and I would rather do all of that work in Illustrator than drop it into Photoshop already the way that I want it. I would actually have probably colorized it in Illustrator too, although I can show you how to do it in this file, but I kind of like doing as much as I can in Illustrator and then pulling that into Photoshop. So here in Photoshop, if I want to make this a color, I can go down to color overlay and I can add it there. And see, I can pick a color. I'm going to go for the greens. Okay, I can also change that blend mode right here, which is nice. I mean, right now there's nothing underneath it, but if that might work out better later, if I want to change that, say okay. And then what I want to do is make sure that that is only on my dollar, my number, which it is. It's right here. It's underneath that, which I like. It's not affecting anything else. And if I want to turn it off, I can always just turn it off later. So I don't really like the way that this has been colorized because, as you notice, what happened was it did was it got rid of my my little outline liner rule that I liked. So there's two things I could do. I could go back into this effect right here and open it up, and I could play with the blend mode, and I could change it to something that actually brings back that white outline like that. So I could play with that a little bit and see what happens there. The other thing I can do is I could just go ahead and turn that off, and I could go back to the way that we've done many of our colorization of things. Is I could go to hue and saturation, I could go to colorize, and then I could use the slider here to pick the color that I want and the saturation, and that is keeping that white outline that I like. So I'm going to go with that one. And then what I'm going to do here is to make sure that this hue saturation is only on my numbers and not on my guy here. Do you see how green he got? Is I'm going to hold down the Option key and I'm going to hover right between the two layers, and that is going to make that hue saturation change only be on the layer right underneath it. And then I'm also going to, for economy's sake, is I'll eventually want to throw away this other color overlay so it's just not there. Okay, so we're going to go grab the leaf. So again, place linked. Going to grab the leaf and place that in. And this is the one that still has the white around it, so I want to get rid of that. And there's ways we could get rid of it. We could go back into the original Photoshop file and we could use the magic wand tool. We could use the pen tool. There's all different ways that we could do that, but we are going to instead, we're going to click on this layer until this opens up. This is the layer style window, and we are just going to bring that down a little bit right in here, blend if gray, and then you just slide that down just a tiny bit and it works to get rid of that background. And you've noticed too, it also got rid of that white right in between all the leaves, so everything that's white has now become transparent. So, okay, Now that leaf is in there, and I'm just going to kind of twist it around. I'm going to make it smaller and just put it somewhere in my beginning of my layout. So let's start adding some type to our currency, and the type that I'm going to add is going to be just pretty simple. I wouldn't use Photoshop for a lot of type or a lot of heavy body copy type of work, so we're just going to do some simple typography. So you go over to the text tool. Make sure you're noticing that underneath the text tool they've got some different ways of doing text with vertical type as well as horizontal. I'm going to come over here and I'm going to just draw a box with my text tool, and it's going to fill it with the copy. That's just an automatic default, but I'm going to go ahead and change that. Now the reason I drew the box is because I knew what I wanted to do. I knew I wanted my type to be within this length, and I also know that I want my type to be justified, so I am going to go to the character settings, or I think it's in paragraphs, and I'm going to make that a justified text so that it'll spread all the way across. Then I'm going to go to character and I'm going to play a little bit with the tracking to make that just spread all the way across. I might also bring down my sizing a little bit and then do the tracking again. So very similar to Illustrator and InDesign in the way that it works with type. You just got to open up these character palettes and the paragraph styles, and then some of those tools are actually all up here also, but just not all of them, so you can always open them up here, and if you don't see them here, go up to Window and then you can bring them down by opening them up right there and then right there. So this one, I knew what I wanted to do with this type, so I drew the box. Another way that you could work with type would be to just click down in your space. So what I could do instead on this one is I could go to the text tool and just click, and that creates a line of type. But notice that it's not in a box. It's more of a line work than it is actually stuck in a box like this one is. So there's just two ways of doing the type, and you want to just think about which way is the best. So I'm going to go ahead and highlight this, and I'm going to make this one my numbers. And put that over there. So I'm going to add my serial numbers, and I'm going to try using the vertical type tool. So I'm going to go over here to the vertical type, and I'm going to make a box right here. And it automatically filled again with that default, which I want to change. I'd like to use a different typeface for that, and then I'm just going to type in my serial numbers, which I'm just kind of faking. But it does a nice job of adding the vertical type, and then I might need to do, a little bit of playing with it to get it exactly the way I want it. So I'm going to bring the size down a little bit. What I really want to do is I want to get rid of that tracking that was on there from before. There we go. And then I'll put my lighting back and just put that into place. Right, so this is getting a little messy looking, but it's okay because I've got my sketch, so I know where I'm going with this. And if it gets to be too much to look at, you can always, you could turn off some of your layers so you can focus more on the area you're working on. I also need to move my security pattern down because it's on top of my image that I don't like, so I can move that down, and that kind of cleans up the page a little bit. So we're going to add a gradation, and there are two ways that you can add gradation. So you can add a gradation over your entire layer, or you can add it within specific shapes. So if you want to put it over on its own layer, then you need to create that layer for it, or you need to put it on a layer that is not a smart layer. So most of my layers are smart layers or type, so I can't put a gradation on any of those, and I don't want to put it on my golden ratio layer because I'm going to get rid of that. So I would just go up to new layer, and I could call that gradation. And what I would do is just go over here to the gradation tool, and I would create a layer. I would check up here, like up in here is where I can pick different colors and such. So I'm just going to go ahead and grab it because I'm not going to keep this. I'm just showing you how to use it, and I just drag across the page and it makes the gradation. And you have a lot of settings up in here of what kind of layer you want that gradation to be, what the opacity is, the direction you want it to be at. This one would take it and make it a radial instead. And right now what I'm doing is I'm making quite a mess because I'm just putting gradation on top of gradation. And then over here is where I could change the color if I wanted to change the color. But this is not quite what I want to do, so I'm going to go ahead and delete that layer. Instead, I'm going to put my gradation into a rectangle. So I'm going to go over to the rectangle tool, and I'm going to draw a box. And it's going to fill it with a solid. That just must be the default, and this property panel opens up, and right in here is where I'm going to work with is that I'm going to change it. I'm going to change it to a gradation by clicking on that. I can change it to a gradation that's already been preset by Photoshop, or I can go ahead and make my own. I'm going to, for the sake of this, I've already obviously got some green gradations made, but I'm going to go ahead and just pick the black one so I can show you how to change the colors. So the first thing I want to do is I don't want it to be linear, I want it to be radial. So I'm going to change that, and you notice that there are other different gradations down in here. So I'm going to change it to radial. And then I'm going to flip it because I want it to be going from the exact opposite of what it's doing, and that's right here. So I'm going to flip it to the other way. The other thing I'd like to do is change the color. So by changing to change the color, I just click on the color stop twice, and that opens up my color palette, which I could go ahead and change by playing with the colors in here, or I can also just go out into my file and I can pick up color from my actual file, which is kind of nice because then I know I'm using all of the same color palette. Say OK. In here I can play a little bit with my colors. I can play with how fast the gradation goes. I can also play with the opacity right here by playing with this slider. So as I slide this, I can kind of make it a slower gradation, meaning that it goes more slowly to white, or you could make it even faster where it goes really fast to white. So I'm going to go ahead and make it a little slower. I'm going to play with these. I could play with the opacity a little bit too if I wanted to, but I'm just going to go ahead and leave that. And I'm going to say OK to that. The next thing that I could do is I can move this. Like I don't really want this to be in the center like that. I want it to really be coming out from behind him, and that's a little trickier to find. You want to click on your layer and click on your gradient fill, and you'll get this box, and then you can go in here and you can just move it. So that's all I'm doing is I'm moving it over to behind him, and say OK. And then the other thing I want to do is I want to start moving my layers, and so I am going to go ahead and move this down because I want it to be underneath my my pattern. I have some refining that I want to do on this to create some more hierarchy and to make this not so busy. So I am going to make the United States copy. I'm going to change that from black to white, and as I highlight it, I can see up here that I can go right up here to this toolbar and go ahead and pick white for that. I don't really like the way my security pattern is so busy and it's so conflicting with everything, so I'm going to go to that. And what I'm going to do with that is I'm going to play with the layer type right up here. So I've clicked on the security pattern and I'm going to play in there and kind of find one that might kind of lighten it up a little bit. And it gives me a few little choices here. And what these are doing is it's how that layer is interacting with the layer below it. So I think I'm going to go with overlay because I like the way it turned it kind of a green because it's coming from the green behind it. Let's see, I still need to add my other 50, so I'm going to again go to the type tool and make a type box. And again, it puts in all that default copy, which I'm just going to get rid of by just doing 5.0. And Photoshop seems to pick up on whatever it was that you typeset before. So, you know, it's got this really weird spreading because it's, yeah, it's justified. So I'm going to change that back. I'm going to highlight it. And I want to go with a little bit of a wider typeface for this spot. Notice when I hover over the size of the type, this little hand comes up, and so that I could quickly go through and make it, you know, bigger or smaller, which when you're going from very drastic sizes, that can work really nice. If you're just making it a little bit bigger, that this thing seems to go too fast. The other thing I need to do is that this tracking is really high, so I need to get rid of that. That's why it looks a little strange. And I'm going to continue just making that a little bigger so it'll fill the space. I wanted it to be white, which it is, and I'm just going to put that right in that space. I could kern it a little bit. Which that works just like Illustrator and InDesign. I still need to add my motto, which goes right here. Again, it's picking up everything that I just did for that typeface, so it's going to be really large. So I'm just going to go right away and make it smaller. And I know I want it flush right. I want it even smaller. And then remember to just continually be turning off and on your golden ratio to kind of see where you're actually at so that that doesn't become too much part of the design, that you're actually filling your spaces. So you can put some different effects on your type in Photoshop. So here I have my United States, and I can just highlight that layer and I can go down to FX, and here I have some effects that I can put on here. So let's just start with, we can start with a stroke. So we could put a little stroke on that. Now you notice the stroke is so large that it's actually filling the letters in. So I need to make that a lot smaller for it to even to look like it's a stroke. And it's still pretty much filling those letters in. So if I wanted to put a stroke onto that type, I would need to pick a bigger typeface, a typeface that could actually hold that stroke. But we can just keep going, and why don't we make it green to see if that's a little better. We could try making it black, but I don't think it's going to work. I think we need to go back and pick a different typeface for that. So I'm going to hit cancel and hit cancel. But this big 5.0, this gives us a little more opportunity to do something with. So I'm going to highlight the 5.0, and I know that I want to put some kind of a drop shadow on it. So first, we don't really see anything here. but we just need to play with some of our tools here to go ahead and make it a little darker. I need to move it and make it coming out from my numbers a little bit so you can actually see it. Play with the size, and you can see there it is. And putting just a faint little drop shadow underneath the numbers makes it feel like it's more part of the bill. It's kind of now going into the going back into the pattern, just becomes more of a complete piece. You can also play with the blend mode here and see what happens. Let's say okay to that, and then let's see what happens if we put a stroke on this one. You can see that the number can just hold it so much better because it's larger. So why don't we just though change the color? There we go. And another thing about making the currency feel more complete is making sure that the transition between your elements is nicely done, or at least thought about. So you can see with this guy right here, with the sharp edge that butts to the rectangle, like that looks okay, but this sharp edge right here, it just makes it so obvious that I clipped this out and then I put it on top of this background. So what we can do is we can go back to this original artwork and we can soften up that edge without being destructive in any way to the artwork. So I'm going to go over to the layer of this guy. I'm going to click on it here because it's linked, and that takes me directly to the linked file that's being placed in. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to work on the mask that I made. I'm not going to work on the image, so I need to click over onto the mask up here, and I'm going to go to the brush tool, and I'm going to make sure that my brush is kind of a soft big brush that's up here in the right hand corner, and my opacity is kind of low too because I just want to slowly work on this area. And again, I'm only working on the mask, not on my image, and I'm just kind of softening up this area. And my hope is that when I bring it back over into my composite, that I won't have such a hard line. Now I might have gone too far with that, and it might take me a couple times to get it, but I'm going to go ahead and say okay. And I'm not worried about saying okay because again, I'm just working on the mask. I can always go back and change it. I'm just going to say okay, and I'm going to save it, and then it's automatically going to update it in my file. And so I'm not completely thrilled with that, but at least I don't have that really dark line. So what I would do is I would just continue to go back to this file here, open it up again, and I might even switch it. I might even bring some of that back, and and start bringing some of it back because I don't really like the way that it looked. I have that option to do that. And then we just want to remember to be careful when we're saving these files because we've created a lot of layers right here that we don't want to accidentally get rid of. So I always have some kind of a naming convention. So I'm going to go up here to File, Save As. And of course you should always be naming your files with your name. So I'm going to do my last name, my first initial. This is Project 3. And it's my currency composite. Now there's other things like I could put at the end of this RGB. That's going to tell me that it's a layered file just because I know my layered files are always RGB. I could also, some people like to call it working files, so they'll just put a W at the end, but you want to start some kind of naming convention so that you don't accidentally delete all of your layers. For example, you want to save these as a Photoshop file, a TIFF file, an EPS. If you were to save this as a JPEG or as a PNG, that would get rid of all of your layers, which would just be devastating to your project. So I'm going to name mine RGB. I'm going to keep it as the Photoshop file. I'm going to put it someplace where I can find it and go ahead and save it. Now throughout the demo I was not saving just because for me this isn't this isn't my final file, this isn't what I'm turning in for a grade, but I would recommend all of you that you be saving your files periodically as you're working so that you don't lose any of your work.